Welcome to the Solar Storm. This is your host, Kyle Hunt, coming to you September 11th, 2016. 15-year anniversary. Isn't that something? 15 years ago, I was sitting in a classroom my senior year of high school. That's when it happened for me. I never really got all that emotional about it. I didn't accept the lines that people are feeding me almost immediately. I remember somebody telling me within an hour, oh yeah, it must have been Osama bin Laden. Like, how the hell do you know that? So, I'm sure you're 9/11'd out. 9/11 is coming to a close, and that is not what I'm going to be talking about here tonight. At least, hopefully not for very much longer. I do have a guest lined up. He hasn't connected yet, but I should be able to get him in here pretty soon. It looks like he just did come on Skype. If you want to hear about 9/11, some really good shows recently, I suggest you check them out. Great roundtable last night, Nick hosting, Chris Dorsey, Shield Maiden, Delcroix, John in Canada, and a few others. Very good call. Sean out there in California. I'm going to bring in my guest tonight. My guest tonight is Mr. Frank Raymond. Are you there, Frank?
I'm here.
Welcome.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, sir. So let me just give the audience a brief rundown of who you are if they're not already familiar. This is the author of Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells, a book that deals with a fictional story regarding white genocide set mainly in Canada. It has some scenes in the United States, and it is quite a fascinating journey going through a lot of different territory, through some kind of trippy scenes as well as you explore the European mind. But what makes this particularly unique is that Frank is not actually a European himself, though he does really appreciate the culture and has a lot of interesting insights into it. And that's what I have him on here tonight to talk about. Frank, you're going to be discussing what makes the European mind unique, and I think you have a great grasp on it. Perhaps it's because you are looking at it from an outside perspective. You have not been immersed in it, therefore taking it for granted. And so please, let's get started by just telling us a little bit about your book itself. Please promote that, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, so my book is, how well do you hear me?
Quite well.
Okay, my book is titled Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells. Terror as in terrorist. So that's Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells. And it's available on all the Amazon outlets. Most people go on Amazon.com. And it's available as an ebook. It's available as a paperback. And I would advise people to try the paperback because it's a bit improved, it's a bit fuller. However, the ebook is pretty good too. A lot of people have liked it. And I wrote this book because I had a deep sense of foreboding. As I see the darkening of the entire Western world, I see the diminishing of the white race that has produced so much art and science and led the world towards an outlook of happiness and optimism, of looking outwards, of looking forward, of wanting to have freedom, of wanting to enjoy oneself. You can just have a look at a beach. You'll see all the Caucasian people taking off their clothes, wearing swimsuits, enjoying themselves sunning. And then in the middle of that, you'll see some Arab woman in a headdress and an all-enveloping tent-like cloak, the very symbol of repression, control, of inward looking, of a killing of joy. So having this deep sense that everything's coming to an end, all the good things that I was able to pass on to my children, for example. When my kids were young, they didn't have any fantasy, anything written for children, anything of a magical nature, and I showed them the film The Wizard of Oz. Little Dorothy from Kansas, transported to a magical land of witches and lions and tigers and bears, oh my. We have nothing like that in the non-white world. We just don't have it. When I saw all this under threat and disappearing, I had to write this book. It cost me a lot in effort and research and lost money, but I think it had to be done.
Could you tell us just a little bit of the response you have gotten from white people and from non-whites as well?
Well, as far as I know, not a single non-white has bought the book or read it. About white people, once I did a few interviews, people got to know about it. And everyone who's bought the book and read it seems to appreciate it. Mm-hmm. And that includes not just white nationalists and aware people, but also I'm talking about liberals. I actually persuaded several liberals to read the book. And they're very hardcore liberals. They are determined that they're just an evil people, not just an evil people, a worthless people, and they should slowly disappear. But it changed their minds. It really did change their minds when they saw that we are not all just the human race identical, that every race is different, and that their race has value despite whatever the Hollywood films might subliminally suggest to them. It has changed the minds of liberals, no doubt about it.
So would you say that this could be a good book as an introduction that some people out there who are white nationalists might think of giving to some of their family and friends who just don't quite get it yet?
Exactly. If they talk to their families, they'll just end up in a debate that goes round and round, each person repeating their own position. But if the liberal actually reads the book, and it's a book, it's a story, it's not a piece of polemic, it's not a speech. Since it's a story, it's easier for people to read as a bit of entertainment, and in the process they read the arguments. And people tell me that it's been written to be easy reading, that they like the fact that it's easy reading and it's in a literary style. At times it's appealing, the style. So they can read it just as a story, but in the process of reading, the arguments, the illustrations of how the white mind is different, or what white people would stand to lose if their societies became majority non-white, it gets to them. The liberals end up reading to the end, and they end up getting converted.
Do you think that there's an added bonus for these liberals in getting the message through to them, in that you yourself are an Indian man writing about white issues and white interests?
Yeah. For some of them, yes, but I don't think that should be the main focus. I think the book stands on its own, whoever wrote it, white, black, or brown, whoever wrote it. The book stands on its own as an exposition of white identity. What is it that stirs the soul of Caucasian man and woman? What is it what are the things of beauty, the scenes of beauty? What does a white person see in the eyes of another white person? Well, what kind of landscape do they visualize? Now, people would say, Kyle, I understand what people say. They say, if you as a brown person can express these things, obviously you can feel the same way. So why do you say that white people have a unique mind that others don't have? Obviously you've absorbed it. So will the other hundreds of millions of people flooding into the West. That's not true, actually. I don't have the white mind. What I have done is I've interviewed almost 1,000 people, and I've listened very carefully when they say, this is what I visualize, this is what I feel in the forest, or this is what I feel by the ocean, or this is how I seem to identify with my ancestors. When I read Robin Hood, for example, something of the past, the Sheriff of Nottingham, the old grey castles. I've listened to them, and they have spoken through my keyboard. So when you read my book, you're not reading my mind or my appreciation or my frame of mind. You're reading all those hundreds of people who are talking through me.
It seems to me that you've got to at least have an appreciation that is somewhat exceptional amongst the non-Europeans of the world in order just to recognize that there's value in the European mind, in the white mind.
That is true. I've been a bit of a loner among my fellows ever since I was a kid, especially when I was at school in England. I was in a boarding house in this school. I was in one particular unit where there were a lot of foreign people, non-white people. And I couldn't understand when I heard them hating white people, the white people they lived among, in fact, that they went to school with, and making snide remarks and talking about, there was one chap, an Asian who lived in East Africa. He was talking about how a friend of his in Kenya, he came from Kenya, how a friend of his, a rich friend, used to get these white girls to go to this hotel, and there he would have his way with them. And he made these gestures about how, very ugly, nasty gestures, that he defiled them and demeaned them by having sex with them. He brought them low. He was taking some sort of nasty satisfaction out of defiling the white race by sleeping with these white girls. I couldn't understand it. I said, why do you have these feelings? Why do you have these feelings of hatred? Why do you have these feelings of resentment and envy? I began to think, well, I am exceptional. I appreciate what the white race has given me, such as Alice in Wonderland, but I don't envy and therefore hate them for it. I suppose I've been through that all my life.
Now, Frank, what were some of the things that struck you first about the differences between the white mind and the non-white mind? What were the things that really jumped out at you and said, well, this is very unique?
Well, I thought today we were going to talk about nature particularly.
Sure, yeah, I was just going to get to that. I wanted to maybe review some of the other things you noticed before we get into nature, because that's definitely something that really resonates with me. And a lot of people I know who just love to go out in the woods, go hiking, camping, all these things that they're called stuff white people like. So there is an acknowledgement, at least among some people. They're actually called SWIPPles. That's the anagram for it. Or excuse me, the acronym for it, SWIPPle, stuff white people like. And, organic ice cream and other things are on the list. But what were some of the other things that you noticed before we get to the appreciation for nature and the animal world?
Okay, suppose I give it to you in a nutshell. I can sum it up in a single concept, and the concept is that the white people are more universe-oriented, and non-white people are more self-oriented. Now, what that means is that a non-white person will think about himself, his particular needs, and when a choice has to be made between his needs and needs of the outside world, the external world, the universe, he'll usually choose his own side, his own self-interest, rather than that of the universe or of wider society. Now, it's a difference in degree. Okay, it's not a difference in kind, it's a difference in degree. The white is more universe-oriented, the colored is more self-oriented. Now, I'll give you one of course, the self, mind you, has extensions. There are concentric rings. There is myself, there is my immediate family, there's my extended family, then there's my nation and race, and finally, there's the whole planet and all the people in it and nature, animals, whales. Now, I'll give you an example here. To a Chinese man, for example, his extension of the first concentric ring is the family, and then the extended family. The next one is the country, the nation. Now, he is sitting in a government office. He has an important position, and there's a job to be given out. And guess what? He gives it to his nephew. He gives the job to his nephew, or perhaps to someone in the extended family. And they appreciate that. They say, that's a good man. He has family values. He's family oriented. He looks after his own. That's the way they look at it. He's a good man. He looks after his own. Whereas a white man in Canada would say, well, if I give the job to my relation, I'm being corrupt. I'm indulging in nepotism. I'm betraying wider society. I'm being unfair. So the Chinese man is looking for the self. He's self-oriented. The white man is more universe-oriented. He says it would be bad for society if everyone favored their own relations. Does that make sense?
It does make sense to me. How the white person is more universalistic, more oriented towards granting favors to those outside of the kind of the close-knit group or the community. That would be unfair. As you said, it's called nepotism. It is something that is frowned upon. But do you think this is something that is hardwired into the white mind, and it's being exploited, or is this something that has come along a little bit later? How do you see this? Is it that we've always been like this, in your opinion, or is it that some people came along and turned us like this?
Nah, I don't think these things can be turned in 1 or 2 generations. I don't think it can be done with technological progress or prosperity. I think if you looked way back into the ice ages and the fact that there would be a small unit living isolated, and a traveler came across, they would cooperate with each other because cooperation was essential in such a icy and harsh climate. Perhaps that was the reason, but these things are very deep. They don't change easily. When I look at Indians who have had to live within Canada, I've looked at Indians born in Canada, and they have retained all those traits, all the nastinesses, and I've had very painful experiences. It didn't just change. They didn't change. I think in the two things that determine, the 2 factors that determine a person's character, there is genetics and there is environment.
Nature and nurture, right?
Nature and nurture. Nature is probably more like 70% and nurture 30%. That's my observations from a lifetime of experiences, close experiences with people. I'd say 70-30 is about it. And let me give you an example that there have been black people in the United States for many generations, and they've lived with democracy, with the Constitution, the rule of law, and all the rest of it. But when Hurricane Katrina came along, sometime in 2003 or 2004, the levees broke, the water swept in, and there was chaos, and suddenly all the structures vanished, the police station, the law, the order. And guess what? They started rioting, looting, raping. They did it all.
Yeah.
That was when really all the artificial structures around them, the rules, the lectures from the television hosts all vanished. They reverted to something quite un-American, one might say. So where was all that nurture then?
Yeah. Well, it becomes dog eat dog when there's no rule of law there. Whereas I've seen this happen before. When a calamity strikes in a white community, that's when they actually put aside their petty differences and pull together for their survival.
And also, you notice that in Japan, when they had some serious flooding, they didn't do any rioting, looting, or turn on each other. They cooperated. They worked together. Mm-hmm. So I would say, nope, these are hardwired. The universal outlook, the white person's attitude that he is a small cell or a small unit in a larger ferment of many units, of many forces and of nature, many life forms, that his prosperity depends on the prosperity of the whole. Yeah. Well, I think that is hardwired.
And I think what might have happened was that that natural tendency, which was once applied to the people that he saw around him, which would naturally be his community, his kinfolk, his nation, and others who shared his common values, that was then applied to people he hadn't even met yet. And that was all right. That universalistic outlook was all right when those people were far away in their own land and not flooding into his and becoming his new neighbors. So I think that this universalistic outlook has been taken and exploited. But We can maybe get into that a little bit later. I'd like to now start getting into the topic that I want to bring up as a primary focus of this show, and that is the white person's affinity towards the natural world. What were some of the things that first stuck out to you in this regard?
Well, I can give you a very recent example. I was recently we had an election in Canada, the one that brought this new Prime Minister, Trudeau, into power, right? Now, prior to the election, there was a lot of talk about oil pipelines. Should we have all these giant pipelines to take energy to China? Should we have new developments, so forth? And all the parties felt that they'd better say that the environment is very important, because white Canadians certainly are very environmentally conscious. So each politician said just about the same thing, that in my view, a green environment and fresh air and water are parts of our economic well-being. What they meant was, of course, parts of our quality of life. They said we don't see a contradiction between a green environment and conservation and economic development. Green is part of our lifestyle, of our quality of life, of our living standards. And they all said this, and that's good. And then one day I went to a focus group because it paid a little money to go. And at the end of the focus group, we found out why they had called us. They really called us because we were going to vote against the Prime Minister then, Mr. Harper, and they wanted to know how to win us back. In the course of the focus group, the environment didn't come in much, but it did come in at one point. Someone talked about the environmental policies of the three candidates. And there was one black man in the room. Out of 31 people, there was one black person. And he was a sophisticated guy. He spoke well. He knew the issues. He had a white-collar job. But he said, you know what, I think you people worry too much about the environment. You keep talking about trees and forests and things like that. You should be focusing on the things people really need, like food and housing and television sets. You should be focusing upon the genuine needs of people and the poverty in society. Who gives a damn if there are trees out there? That's what he said. Who gives a damn if that tree is there? Now, that's I found it astonishing that the one black man in the room took the stance that we worry too much about the environment, and who gives a damn if that tree is there? Now, I give that to you. If I told that story to a liberal, they'd instantly say, oh, that's just one example, one isolated example. You can't make a judgment from one example. But I'm telling you from my experience, it's not one isolated instance. It's not an outliner. I give the story to you as a representative example. Mm-hmm. If you look at the Green Party in Canada, it's a totally white party.
Yeah. Well, if you look at just black neighborhoods, oftentimes there will just be trash, broken down cars in the front yards. And now, of course, there are some white people that will do the same thing, but when you actually compare it to some of the poor white neighborhoods, people who are even poorer than those blacks I was just referencing, they often do keep good care of their properties. And now this isn't, across the board, but I have noticed this as well. And I think it has to do with wanting to just live in a nice surrounding, or caring more about it than some other people might.
Well, it's true, and it is a matter of degree. It's a difference in degree. There are whites who trash their neighborhoods, but they are the very small minority. The vast majority are very conscious of their surroundings, which is why a country like Canada is praised as very clean. Mm-hmm. I've had Korean students coming in and they say, very impressive, very clean. Okay, talking about the universe and the self, here's something quite relevant to what you're saying. In the very street I live in, this is a street of low-rise apartment buildings. What we have seen over the years is there's more trash, a little bit more trash on the streets. There didn't used to be. Now, in the building opposite me, one day I saw this woman came out and started cleaning up the street, the pavement and the street, sweeping up all the garbage that there was. And I asked her, how come you're doing this? And she said, I just can't stand having dirt in the street and in my neighborhood. I just feel. And she was busy cleaning up on the street, the pavement on the street. Mm-hmm. Though she lived in a single apartment, she not only felt that her building should be clean, she felt that the street should be. And she made that effort to do so. I have never seen a non-white do that.
There's actually a group called Green Line Front. It's a group of nationalists, and I actually took part in the first and thus far I think the only action here in North America, or perhaps at least just in the United States. You just go out into your local community with some other people and clean up a park or clean up some other space. And you take some pictures for propaganda purposes. But this is something that I've seen time and again, just all over the place. Actually, after some of the black riots at Ferguson and Baltimore and some other places, there were actually white people who came out with their children the next day and cleaned up the mess that had been made the night before. Now, a lot of these people are kind of the do-gooder liberals who are pretty much covering for the real problem which is going on and don't have any kind of racial consciousness, but they do have a kind of environmental consciousness that we're talking about here. And it's just so interesting to me to see how people can care so much for the environment, yet not realize that all of these foreigners who are being imported or who are invading are not conscious of the environment. You look at the trail of trash that's left as the North Africans and the Arabs flood into Europe. It's just disgusting. And same thing can be said of some of the Central Americans who are coming up into the United States as well. So it's a very important point you're making here. We are going to be going into a break in just a few seconds here, so we'll be picking this up on the other side. A lot more to discuss in this regard. So stay tuned, everyone. Much more coming up. Welcome back to the Solar Storm. My guest tonight is Mr. Frank Raymond, the author of Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells, which is available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. Before the break, we were talking about these the liberals who are environmentalists, but also for open borders because they have this hijacked universalistic outlook. And I think maybe they assume that everybody else shares their values, and if they don't yet, once they come to live amongst their goodness, they will adopt their ways. And by embracing all of this mass immigration, what they're doing is bringing in people who are going to create the exact opposite of everything that they value. It's just incredible.
Okay, you should trust me to be a bit of a psychologist because I've been interviewing hundreds of people. So suppose I address that issue, okay?
Oh, please do.
Okay, what happens is that in everyone's outlook, there's a hierarchy of the most important thing, then the second most important thing, then the third most important thing. The trouble is with today's white people, whatever's in their mind, their outlook is what's programmed into them, what they've been mind contaminated with. I'm borrowing the term of certain Monica Schaefer. So this worldview that they have is an implanted worldview, but like all worldviews, it has a hierarchy. And in that hierarchy, the topmost one always wins. Now, the topmost in the hierarchy is to despise the white, despise and kill the white, and worship the alien. The alien is better. That's the first thing in the hierarchy. That will always take precedence. So, look at the situation with these feminists in Europe. They say they're feminists, but the fact is they're not really. They've been programmed to think, kill the white, worship the alien. And as secondary to that, they're feminists. They're only feminists in order to serve that purpose. So when these Arab men rape them, their sisters, their daughters, or whatever, it doesn't bother them because the primary command in their mind, the keynote command is to worship the alien. So it's all right if they get raped. The feminists are not screaming about the rape of of European women by Arab men or Muslim men.
I don't know. I don't know if there are serious, feminists out there who have brought this up. I think maybe some of them in Germany, but the ones that we're seeing all over the media, like Femin, funded by George Soros up until they wanted to go protest in Israel, they are definitely doing exactly what you're saying. And a lot of these other notable celebrity feminists that are out there, they only care about rape of women, rape culture, when it's apparently white men doing it.
Okay.
And it's always questionable circumstances they're dealing with there. No. But when it's the invaders doing it, no. It's them just lashing out at white supremacy, or let's just not even talk about it at all.
Well, the primary command is kill the white, worship the alien. The secondary command is hate white men, because that will serve the primary command.
Right.
That's basically it. Okay.
There was, just to drive this point home, there was a photo op of one of these topless women. I don't even want to call them women. And across her bare chest and stomach, it said, "Foreigners F better," and she's essentially humping a large globe in the photo in orgasmic delight. So these women are getting paid, and this is part of a demoralization campaign. Also, they're trying to have other young women model this behavior, get the message in their head that instead of running from these rapist refugees, they should be opening their legs in delight, because they are far superior, far more masculine than the European men who are so good to them.
Everything alien is better, from Buddhism to the virility of African men. Everything alien is better. Everything foreign is better. But why did I bring up the feminists? There was a reason. It's the same with the Green Party type people. In Canada, we have a Green Party. You have a similar organizations all over the Western world.
Right.
Now, you were asking why they don't object to the mass immigration that is devastating the environment in two ways. One, by overpopulation. Secondly, by the influx of people who are not nature friendly. Because the Green Party, the sort of person who joins the Green Party has the liberal worldview implanted into him. The primary command is worship the alien. So when they confront a political issue and they say, we've got to look out for the environment, but then the primary command comes in and says, wait a minute, that's not the first thing you want to do. The first thing you want to do is bring in millions of aliens and, bugger your environment. Don't worry about that. Obey the primary command. So the average liberal will never, Green Party or not, will never object to mass immigration. The person who will take a stand for the forests, for the animals, for the environment, for clean air, has to be a person who is much stronger in mind. Now, what's the truly free-minded person who stands for the environment will say, okay, we have to stop this mass immigration. He becomes a white nationalist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Yeah. He doesn't join these green movements. The person who joins the green movements is already mind raped. So don't worry about them. They won't save the environment. Rather, they'll kowtow to the immigration lobbies, as they do in Canada. They will obey the primary command.
It's interesting just to look at what the origin of a lot of the organic movement and the green movement actually was. Environmentalism in many ways was pioneered by the National Socialists of Germany. So there's nothing inherently leftist or evil or anti-white about loving the environment and wanting to protect it. Not to the detriment of your people, in fact, to the long-term security of your folk.
Exactly. Precisely. And I suppose, if you want to pick my brains, I'd tell you that these liberals, they don't know the situation in other countries. They don't know what these peoples are like when it comes to animals. They have no idea. So maybe I'll give you 3 examples from my own life.
Please.
And if these reach even a small audience, it'll be worth it. Some years ago, I was in Puerto Rico in San Juan on a short holiday. And I was on a beach, it was very urban place. I was on a beach, and there was an iguana, and I saw these men running around very wildly, laughing, chortling, cackling. And most iguanas are the iguanas I saw in Costa Rica were very sedate. They just sat in one place, and they were a single color. This one was a striped one, white and green stripes it looked like, and it was much more athletic. But they were chasing this iguana with wild glee, and then finally it dodged into a gap in the rocks, a crevice, but they dragged it out by the tail. It's badly injuring it. You could see one of its legs had been badly smashed up in it. And then they were running off with it. So I stopped to say, why are you doing this? And they looked at me very, very angrily. And their I couldn't understand the Spanish, but it was mind your own business. I don't know what they intended to do with that iguana, but I know that wouldn't happen in a white country. 15 men chasing it and then hurting it as they haul it out of a rock. What on earth was the purpose of this kind of thing? Were they going to eat it? I don't know. But let me take you to India. And I'll tell you that in India we have street shows. People put up shows with animals, and that's how they make a living. And they put up a show and they take a little money from everybody who watches. And there was this fellow who had a snake, a cobra. And I don't know, the cobra probably had its fangs taken out, but it looked pretty vicious. The cobra looked pretty vicious. And he had a mongoose. And the show was for the mongoose to avoid the cobra, and the mongoose are very agile at dodging the cobra. You do know that the mongoose and the cobra are enemies.
Oh, yeah.
And the mongoose usually manages somehow to get its bite into the neck of the cobra from behind. But the show went on with the cobra dodging the mongoose, and then the man said decided he'd entertain the crowd in a better way. And he grabbed the mongoose, so one person grabbed the mongoose, and the other person lifted up the tail of the mongoose, and he put the cobra's mouth to the anus of the mongoose. Now, for the mongoose, for anyone, a snake is a terrible, frightening, scary thing. It's a sinister thing. For a mongoose, it's super sinister. The snake is its biggest enemy. But he's got this cobra with its evil head and its forked tongue flickering at the anus of this mongoose while he's kept the tail lifted up to let the cobra do it. And the mongoose is simply terrified. I have never seen such fear, terror, sheer panic in the eyes of any animal. And do you know what? The whole crowd burst out laughing. And they found this terribly amusing, that this mongoose is being terrified almost to death.
Wow.
I went sick to my stomach. I literally couldn't sleep that night. I just couldn't sleep. That's the kind of abuse that is common in the third world.
You know, it reminds me of both kosher and halal slaughter, where they're trying to induce as much fear as possible in these animals. And this is actually what factory farming has become in the United States as well. It's very, very sickening, and they need to keep it under wraps, because if this really got out, people would just be horrified. The American people just find it horrific, the eating of dogs and cats and things that go on in these other countries, like China, where they boiled dogs alive to eat them. And they apparently this makes the meat more tasty, or it gives it more adrenaline, and it's so sick. And we don't understand why this is why this would ever take place, because we project our values onto others. I could not gain pleasure from that. I'd be horrified. I can't understand why anybody else would enjoy that. So they kind of put on their blinders, and they ignore these different racial realities.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you the second story, and then I'll make my point. I was a businessman, and like all prosperous people, we had servants in the house, but I had to stay out a lot. It was a very engaging business. Anyway, one morning I was going out, and I find that these servants of mine and the servants of neighbors have got a little animal. and they've got it tied up. And what was this animal? It was a fox. Now, we don't have many foxes in Bangladesh left. The overpopulation, they have razed all the forests to enable cultivation. The forests have literally vanished. There are no woods, there are no trees, there are no jungles. I was looking at a fox. Now, I don't know what, it wasn't as slim as, and as delicate as the foxes of England, but it was kind of a fine-boned, slimish, dog-like creature. And it looked very pathetic. It didn't look aggressive. It was rather kindly, humorous, sort of a smiling animal. One would say cute. And there was this fox shivering, and it wasn't even full grown, it was half grown. And these fellows had caught it, and they had it tied up. And I thought to myself, I'm looking at one of the last foxes left in the country. We have destroyed the environment and the forests and wildlife. But I'm probably looking at the last out of a half dozen foxes left in the country. So I told them, I said, no, you're not going to do anything to it. I said, what are you doing this for? Why have you tied this animal up? Why haven't you given it water? And they said, we're going to beat it to death. We're going to beat the bastard to death. I said, why? And they said, they steal chickens. I said, you're in the city. You get your food supplied to you 3 times a day, courtesy of me. He's not eating your chickens. Well, but they eat the chickens in the countryside. I said, well, he's not eating your chickens. This is one of the last foxes left in the country. We'll treat him well. You give him water, and leave him be till I come back. Well, I was back in the evening, and guess what? The fox has disappeared. I did ask for it, and they said it got away. It escaped. In the following days, I got the truth out. They had beaten that fox to death with clubs and hockey sticks. They had beaten it in the ribs. They had swung terrible blows at its neck, at its head. This fox had slowly died. Its skull got crushed. Then they beat it again, and the brains came out. Its tongue came out. Its lungs were panting, and they watched, and they cackled, and they chortled, and they hee-hawed, and they encouraged each other on, and they whooped and they hollered, and they kept beating this animal to death until it finally breathed its last and its eyes popped out. That's what they did. And I did pay someone to get me to the body, and there was the smashed up, pathetic remains of the pulped flesh of this fox, and it's what was left of its fur. Now, the fact is that these are the common people, and this is their natural instinct. No one taught them to do these cruelties. These cruelties come naturally to them. They see a mongoose. There are very few left, and they run to kill it. These are almost the genetic, inbred, innate instincts of the people. And terrible comment to make, but that's true.
Wow.
And so I once told a liberal these 2 stories, a liberal woman, and I said, you talk about the fact that the coloreds are better, kinder, and all that, but this is what is actually happening. This is what I've seen. This is what happens. It's still happening today. How can you say that these people are kindlier, better people than your own? How can you say that they're identical to your people? Do you do that? And they listened and kept quiet, and then this woman finally said, okay, so they're at a lower level of development. I said, well, that's a big admission. For you who says you're being enriched in culture by all these colored people, by all these immigrants, now you admit that they're at a lower level of development. But that's the liberal. They'll find an excuse. It is not a matter of development. It's a matter of innate nature. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Now, from my experiences with the people I've known in my life, that is not the innate nature of the white man. However, it has been conditioned, indoctrinated into us in certain instances through the different TV shows, through the movies, through the books, through the education, through different peer pressure, and organizational pressure, where you have, let's say, the military. And you take a look at what happened at Abu Ghraib as just one tiny example. We see the utmost cruelty being brought out of people in these situations. And I really do think that it is going against their nature for the most part. And that's why they have to spend so much time researching their psychology to find out how to break people, how to manipulate people, and all the rest. This does not come natural to them. And I think that we have been turned against not just ourselves, but against the outside world, which is what fuels a lot of this animosity that we have coming towards us now.
Well, I will say that it's a matter of degree, and the degree is important. When it's the 50% mark is the mark of decision. There is cruelty to animals among white people. There are white kids who are born sadists who torture cats, for example. Or who shoot animals for no good reason.
Or burning ants with a magnifying glass.
Yeah, and there was a case of I was watching a murder mystery where this man went missing. He was murdered, but his dog got away. And when his dog came down off the hills, it seemed the local farmers shot at it. I couldn't understand why anyone would want to shoot at a lost, stray, starving dog, but they did. So it is a matter of degree, and there is a degree of cruelty towards animals in white people, and there are a few who are very cruel, but I'd say that's the exception. I'd say the degree is a lot less. Now, someone mentioned the question of bear baiting. Have you ever heard of bear baiting?
Well, I know of trapping, using traps to catch bears and other animals.
Well, this is something different. In the Middle Ages, they'd catch a bear and tie it to a stake or something, and then everyone would poke a stick at it and annoy it, and the bear would turn on them but couldn't do anything because it's tied up. It couldn't quite get to them. And at the end of all the baiting, as they call it, they killed the bear. As a matter of fact, they show that in the film Macbeth, the Polanski version of Macbeth. Now, I looked into that, and I said that's a rather cruel thing to do, to take a bear and tie it up and poke at it and mock it and in every way give it pain and annoyance and then finally kill it. But it seems the noblemen would do that as a distraction for their populace, a kind of bread and circuses to keep the poor people entertained. Mm-hmm. I don't think that was in the innate nature of European people to do that.
The same thing with fox hunting, actually. That was the aristocracy who really did that. And that was one of the first things that was outlawed in National Socialist Germany. It was fox hunting, and vivisection was right up there at the top of the agenda, so that there was no unnecessary experimentation being done on these animals. They really, really cared for the animal world. I mean, that was their primary. One of the first things they did was just made it so that kosher slaughter wasn't allowed, that you couldn't run these experiments and torture these animals. And of course, this goes against what we hear about later on, where they're doing all sorts of horrid things to human beings, let alone animals, but human beings. And so it's really sad for me to see how our people could be, how they could be conscientious of the environment, of the living world, and how we're not living up to that, which I do think is our natural state. And what you're saying, although there are aberrations and quite horrible ones as well, oftentimes it is not the mass of the people who are the ones participating in this or wanting it. It is pretty much either forced upon them or going on behind the scenes.
Oh yeah, and I think even today, though whites live under an alien culture and under indoctrination, even today the spirit of conservation, of the spirit of helping animals, the spirit of nature love is still very strong. There's no doubt about it.
Bird watching, things like that. Does this exist in the non-white world?
No, it doesn't. And people reading my book would find a mention of that.
I have read it, just so people know. That's why I'm bringing up some of these things.
There is no bird watching, or ever has been, in the third world. Someone actually sent me a message on Facebook saying that the most prominent bird watcher of England was a black man. And in fact, there is a black man in England who seems to make quite a splash with his bird watching. But as I wrote back to him, one swallow does not a summer make, since you're talking of birds. And secondly, would that black man be doing it in a society of his own? In Haiti or Jamaica or Africa, would he be doing it? And then, of course, you'd have to look into it and see what's his motivation. Does he make money out of it? But bird watching is like a lot of other things, a peculiarly white activity. See, I don't have to really spell out to your audience that the white love for nature, for trees, for forests, for animals is unequaled. We have white people go to Africa to build lion refuges and refuges for the giraffes.
Stop poachers.
Yeah, and nobody else does it. No Japanese person or Arab oil millionaire does it. We have people here in Canada who give up their lives to make a shelter for eagles and owls. They actually give up their lives to do that, and they dedicate themselves to it. When I had two dogs that were dying, when I had one of my dogs was dying and I needed some sort of help financial to save its life, I found out that all the dog shelters in Vancouver were operated by white people. The Orientals and others have dogs, but no one actually runs a shelter or runs a charitable organization to help in such cases. There's such a thing as an owl hospital in the white world. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't see that. But
now, it could be argued that this very thing that we're talking about here is what has been used against us because we care so much for the living creatures. So we see the poor, starving African over there, across the seas, and we send them the money like so many people have done after seeing the advertisements on TV or the boy crying. And so I think that there needs to be something there. We need to have something to temper this love for all of the external world and realize that we're really throwing things out of whack, out of balance with our current policies. And that is not environmentally friendly to have Africa, quadruple in size in no time flat.
Well, you remember what I said about the concentric rings of the self?
Yes.
The family, the extended family, the nation and race, the state, and then the whole world. Well, at one time, whites, when left alone to themselves, had a balanced notion of these rings. And they put their family first, and then their extended family, then their nation, then the world. And in fact, today's liberal, a liberal white woman does exactly that. I know a liberal.
Frank, hold on. We'll be back for the second hour, and then we'll get into quite a bit more about the non-white mind from your own experience. Stay tuned, everyone. Welcome back. It is the second hour here with Frank Raymond, the author of Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells, which you can find on Amazon. Go check it out. Very interesting read. Find a lot of his insights into the white mind to be quite accurate and things that perhaps we haven't thought of simply because we do take it for granted. And it is told in a fun fictional story as well. Now, Frank, before the break, we were talking about, liberals and the environmentalism. Yeah. You were mentioning a particular liberal that you know.
Okay. I was talking about the concentric rings of the self.
Right.
There's the self, the family, the extended family, the nation and race and the country, and then there's the whole wide world. Now, let's take, most people have always had a balanced view of it, that they favor their self, then they favor their family, then the extended family, but they favor the inner rings and do what they can without, if they help the outer rings, like someone in Africa, they'll do it without hurting their own people. They'll put their own interests first. Now, I was once debating with a white liberal, a woman, and she was saying that I was saying, why don't you favor your own people? If you bring in millions of people from Malaysia, China and Africa, your own people will be dispossessed. They won't have soil to grow food from. And she said, well, that's rather a hateful point of view. Obviously, if you obviously hate these people. I said, well, it's not me. I'm talking about you, for God's sake. It's your country, your society, and your soil. No, she said that would be a hateful attitude. To prefer my own people would mean I hate those people. I said, okay. So between the concentric rings, she seems to have forgotten her nation and race. That doesn't exist. That ring around herself doesn't exist. But the rest of the world does, or it's more important than that concentric ring. That's in fact the brainwashing. But then, Kyle, here's the point. Some weeks after that, her daughter got into trouble, and her daughter was homeless. She lost the place she was living. She didn't have much money either. And certainly she needed to find a place in a hurry. And guess what? She let her daughter come in and live with her. This liberal white woman let her daughter come in and live with her. And the daughter lived with her for 4 months in her own house. And I said to her, well, my friend, there are many bums on the street. If they asked, could they come and live in your place because they don't have a place to stay, would you let them? And she said, of course not. My family comes first. I said, I see. So then I have to then assume that you hate all those people. Like that bum on the street over there, that shiftless looking guy in the ragged clothes, you must hate him because you refused to let him into your house and live in your spare bedroom. But your daughter did, so you hate him. She said, no, has to be a common, I'll give to the Salvation Army and I'll do my good works and try to help that man, but not at the expense of my own family. I said, I see. So, but you will let them destroy your own race, your own people, to serve the third world. Now, where does something here not make sense? Well, what makes sense, what really is happening here is that even the liberal has a notion of priorities, of their kith and kin being very important. But it's their immediate kith and kin that is still important. That has not been brainwashed out of them. The love for the family has not been mind-controlled out of them.
Right. Well, she's able to see that it applies in the microcosm, but doesn't understand the macrocosm.
Not in the second ring, not so much the extended family and apt for the nation and the race. Absolutely not, because that ring, that concentric ring around the self is evil. That's worthless. That's bad.
Yeah. It's rotting it's basically like a tree, with the concentric circles rotting from the inside out. Because preference is just all given away to the bark at the expense of the core. Now, it frustrates me to see that these white people can't understand that they're often the ones who are the stewards of the environment, but they're made to think completely otherwise. Because of this different programming from Dances with Wolves and all these other stories about how every non-white group out there lives in perfect harmony with the environment, but then the white man came with colonization and just screwed it all up, threw it all out of whack, and we're the problem that caused all of this. And just real quickly, some of this has merit because I do think the industrialization of the world was fueled by the European, but I don't think it was the innermost European spirit coming out in the industrial manifestations.
Well, okay, let me address that. But before I'll address that. But before I address that, let me give you an example, a real story from just a month ago. And then I'll address the very issue that you said, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, about a month ago, I was on a road trip in the States, and I had to unexpectedly stop in Seattle to look for an office. And after that, I felt like having coffee, and someone pointed me to a coffee shop called Bean on the Street. Bean on the Street, nice name for a coffee shop. And as I was sitting there having my coffee, there was a group of white people, both young and old, at the next table, and the leader of the group seemed to be this man of about 60, who it seemed to me was retired and had a lot of time, and they had their laptops with them. And they was talking about the fact that there's this methane belt around the Earth, around the planet. And the methane belt is a very dangerous development, as bad as the ozone layer vanishing. And the methane belt is around the equator, around the equatorial belt, where the mass of the population is. And that is one of the most menacing things happening, and its overpopulation is a problem. And, where is the world going to head? So I thought to myself that nowhere outside the white race would such a discussion would be taking place. Nowhere. Mm-hmm. On such a broad scale, and thinking of the future, thinking of the whole planet and thinking of the future and being concerned about it, only the white race would be. But as I was leaving, I said, if you don't mind me saying so, I overheard your conversation, sir. You mentioned overpopulation, that the methane is coming out of the populated areas of the Earth, but you didn't really pursue that point. It is overpopulation that is the source of all the problems of the Earth, from the ozone layer to the acid rain, to poverty and war and lack of water. Overpopulation is the devil, and unless you control that, you'd better, forget everything else. That's the main thing. And the second thing I said was the nature of the people. It's not the number of people. It's the number of people and the nature of the people. If the people are polluting, non-respecting of nature, non-respecting of nature's laws, you have real trouble. So it's the number of people and the quality of the people. And this man turned to me and said, well, you know what? White people, you really should beware of white people, because they will end up mass murdering billions of people. They're capable of it. In order to reduce the population of the world, whites will mass murder billions of people to solve the problem, and whites have the ruthlessness, nastiness, and meanness to do it. It's the white race that's the problem, he said. Now, he was a white man, surrounded by white people, and he said, in effect, that we whites are the problem on the Earth. He can't see that only a white would be worried about the methane belt and the future of the Earth. Mm-hmm. He can't see it. It illustrates something to you, or two or three things. One is that whites are a universe-oriented people, not a self-oriented people. It takes a universe-oriented soul to think in those terms of what's going to happen in the next century, where the Earth is going, where the huge human collective is going, what the methane belt will do. It also shows that he doesn't see that he seems to have the feeling that for the universe to get better, the white race has to disappear. This man genuinely believed that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now that's a pretty disturbing development, and I couldn't stop to talk to him. I had to go on with my road trip. But I really wanted to ask, who has been implanting these ideas into your mind? For God's sake, when you vanish, there'll be no one to talk about the methane belt.
The programming is so pervasive and insidious that he wouldn't be able to pinpoint one source. It's everywhere. That's the message we're getting from all different corners. It's hard to really get through to people with the counter arguments. They can't see the reality that's right in front of their eyes. But in regard to this care for the more universal, do you think that this could also be due to time preference? So a lot of the people that come from the warmer climates, they haven't had to deal with really harsh winters and thinking far into the future and delaying gratification so that they can reap the rewards later, or maybe just survive at all. So it has forced, the environmental conditions have worked along with evolution, it seems, to create people that really do think ahead to the future and say, whoa, what is this world going to be like if we don't rectify our ways now? And they can see all of the different trends, the whales disappearing, being hunted to oblivion, all these species dying, and they're very frightened because they're thinking, whoa, I don't care if I can make a few extra bucks from blowing up that mountain and doing XYZ to the environment. I want to leave a place for my children, where a lot of the other people of the world are just thinking, hey, if we can exploit these resources ASAP, let's do it so we can be rich now.
Well, you're absolutely right, Kyle, that the dealing with winter and the future, what the future will bring, brought about or triggered a genetic change in whites. That is true. But there might be other factors there as well. As one of the characters in my book speculates, that some of these differences, some of the white outlooks cannot be explained as an adaptation, as an evolutionary adaptation. There may be otherworldly elements, sort of life sparks from other worlds that come into our earth and affect people that have entered the makeup of different races. That is a possibility. It's a possibility that a universe-traveling creature contributed some of its life essence to different races, and the whites got more of it, and therefore they think in universal terms. Therefore they stand on the edge of the ocean and feel a deep sense of romance for the ocean, which no other people feels.
Now,
that could be. But can I answer?
Please.
Can I amplify the point that you made, that whites have this implanted, indoctrinated point of view that they're a threat to nature? I'll make the point with respect to the native Indians of North America. When I was a student in the UK, students were taught, and this was in the 70s, way back when, that the native Indians were a nature-loving, that they felt a part of the environment they lived in. And for example, a student was telling me that, did you know that while we whites are going around mowing down and razing the forests, the native Indian, he would, before chopping down a tree, he would pray to it and ask its forgiveness. I said, really? And he said, yeah, he read it and he believed it. Now, that's interesting. But later on, this became part of the mythology that native Indians are great stewards of nature and great nature lovers. And there are tiny, tiny little drops here and there. For example, I'm a consultant to students, and one day a student showed me a piece of work. They are actually teaching this in the universities, that we in Canada and the United States should look to the native Indians as a model of how to coexist with nature and how to live a technologically comfortable life while still being a part of nature. And the example they gave was the BC, the natives of British Columbia, that they never destroyed their environment and they lived with it. We must learn from them. Well, I told my student, I said, you might want to write back as your response that there were 10,000 native Indians in the whole of British Columbia, a vast territory, as big as any U.S. state. It's as big as twice as big as Washington State, British Columbia. And there were only 10,000 natives living here, and they didn't have the tools to transform the environment. They were a Stone Age people. They didn't have metal tools. They couldn't build a permanent structure. They couldn't build a dam. How the hell could they destroy the environment? But no, the native Indians are held up as an example of being wonderful stewards from whom white people should learn.
Oh yeah, the Amerindians are really just shown in just this kind of hippie idealized light, when it could be further from the truth. The incessant warring between tribes, the waste of animals, and the cruelty that was exhibited towards the prisoners of war, the torture. It's just what you were talking about. They were delighting in skinning people alive and doing just the most sickening things, especially to the white women that they'd capture as well.
Yeah, and in their villages, apparently the instruments of torture are right there in the village square.
Yeah.
because for their between warfare among themselves, for example, torturing a captive unnecessarily, not to get information, but just for the fun of it and to see how long he can stand it and to honor him if he can stand it to the end without screaming. Anyway, I'll tell you the next point. These things are done drip by drip. Now, tiny little drips, but 1,000 drips make up an effect. There's this TV program called Star Trek Voyager. You might have seen it.
No, I haven't seen it, but I know of the program.
Well, Star Trek has gone through several evolutions and stages, and Star Trek Voyager is about this spaceship Voyager which is lost in the Delta Quadrant. And they have a second officer named Chakotay, who is of native Indian origin. And one day, their ship comes to this planet, which has been settled by native Indians. They've gone out of the earth and settled the whole planet, and they're all native Indians living like native Indians, but in the 24th century. Anyway, when Chakotay comes to them in his uniform, and they say, "Where did you come from?" He says, "I come from that spaceship over there." And the native Indian chief looks at him with alarm and says, there's fear on his face, and he says, "You come from those people who destroy everything?" And Chakotay shows him that, no, we've solved our problems. But there's this mythology created in that little instance, that the native Indians are wonderful stewards of nature, and they're afraid of those white people who come and destroy everything.
Right, so definitely.
There's another little drop,
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you the reality of it, because I see the reality. I live in British Columbia, and often I go to the island, Vancouver Island. And when I visit these people, I go to this park, and every day the park is left in a mess. There's beer cans, trash, all kinds of dirty stuff, pizzas, and a lot of vomit. And even people have been shitting there. There's literally feces there from shit. And who's doing this? It's the native Indians. They don't take care of the park. They come and mess it up. And they do it every single day. And every single morning, there's a guy, a white man, goes out with 3 garbage bags and he cleans it up.
Jeez.
And this is a real story. I'm not lying to you. I've seen this with my own eyes. And they do that to all the parks there. They're sitting around getting drunk, carousing and drunk, and they leave their dirt, their waste, their bottles, their half-eaten pizzas, their chips, and they just leave it. They don't feel the need to clean it up. Now, you know that also the salmon season is a very big matter here. When spawning times comes around, the salmon come up all the major rivers, and they find their spawning ground, and that's very, very important. I watch it every year because sometimes you see some of the salmon are so tired they die and they're washed up on shore. Now, as it happened on the Cowichan River, I saw one day these native Indians are spearing the fish. They're literally using spears and whooping and hollering like so many feral savages and spearing the fish, and the river is very shallow at that point. So there were people there, white people, saying, "Why are you doing this? The fish haven't yet spawned. They have to go up and spawn, and then we'll have another generation of fish. You're spearing them before on their way to the spawning ground. There'll be no more salmon eggs." And the natives look at him and they say, "There's enough fish for everybody," and they go on with their activities of killing the salmon. And then again, another group tried to explain to them, "This is not right." And they said, "Will you shove off?" They said, "Don't be stupid. This is our land. We can do what we like. There's enough fish. Just get lost." Now, how can that be? These are the responsible stewards of the environment. They kill the salmon before they can spawn. And then, guess what? They don't even eat all the salmon. 3/4 of them rot uneaten because they take home so much.
Right.
They kill so many and take home so much, the salmon just rot right there on the reservation.
Yep.
And these are facts. These are not theories and essays. But then you take the white liberal. Now, as an academic consultant, I get to read a lot of so-called scholarly articles. A scholarly article means an article written by an erudite ape who can use a lot of words, but he's an ape in essence. There's the ape with the big brain case.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an article about this event that took place where there was a conflict between some native Indian tribe in America and the U.S. government. When they had a conflict over land and resources, especially over the water and the fish. And one of these tribes was called the Makah, M-A-K-A-H, the Makah Indians. In the middle of this conflict, they went out to do a whale hunt. And unfortunately for them, it got filmed. And people tried to stop them and said, why must you do this? They said, no, this is a part of our identity and our traditions. If we don't do the whale hunt, you are committing cultural genocide upon us. And so forth. And they hunted down this whale. And they speared it numerous times. And the whale took almost a day to die. It bled to death slowly, gasping painfully. It was a horribly cruel thing to do. That whale's death agony lasted a whole day. And with one spear after the other, one shotgun blast after the other, and slowly its life ebbed out. Some of it was filmed. And there were people writing about it, about the cruelty to this whale, and mostly white people saying that in order to prove your identity, you have to carry out a rite, so-called ancient rite and custom. What kind of crap is this? Well, a white man from one of the institutes of journalists decided to take up the cudgels. He decided to take up the cause of the Indians and say, no, you white people are stupid. You don't understand. You have cultural insensitivity. So he wrote a 40-page article, closely typed. And I read the article. I took it upon myself to read the whole article. So what was the argument he made? That this is a case of semiotics.
Mm.
Semiotics, the science of symbols. And he goes on to say that there's the sign, the signifier and the signified. And the whale was a sign, or the whale was a signifier. And what was signified was something on a broader canvas. A lot of mumbo jumbo, a lot of bullshit.
Yeah.
A lot of big words, ontological, epistemological. But at the end of 40 pages, he basically said that the Makah identify with the whole universe, and the heaving sea is a part of that universe, and the whale is a part of it. And by killing the whale, they were bonding with the universe.
Oh, incredible.
Now, you and I, we just being racist baboons, we wouldn't understand it. But this journalist who had a PhD and had come out of some university, he understands it because he knows the arcane science of semiotics. Now, whites are told that they are the threat to nature, and all these other peoples, they're just peace-loving peoples who live within nature as part of it, and organic parts, but they ought to go and see some of these things, the whale hunts. They ought to see the spearing of the salmon before they can spawn, the greed that these people exhibit.
Mm-hmm. How about, Frank, we turn to where you originated, in India. We were talking about the American Indians. Let's go to the actual Indians of India. How was your upbringing, and what should white people know about the differences between, what India is like and how we live, or how we at least used to live here?
Well, you can, since we're talking about nature, let's talk about nature. Why are these things so important? Why do you have to know these things? Okay. Now, take a man in India who's told that what's happened is they've had 4 children, because an Indian feels that his insurance policy for his old age is his children. I wish some white people thought that way, but Indians take it to an extreme. They have 4, 5, 6 children. Because when I'm an old man, these children will look after me. They'll, earn the money, and they'll clean the house, and they'll cook their wives will cook the food. And what happens is that his piece of land becomes subdivided into 6 bits. for his 6 sons, and then that becomes subdivided. And then it becomes overpopulated, and each family has only a tiny little bit of land, and it doesn't sustain them.
Right.
Okay? The reason that it's sustaining in a country like Bangladesh, it only survives because of foreign aid. If there were no wheat and other foodstuffs going from the US, the country would starve. Now, this Indian is not thinking of in universal terms. He's thinking of self terms. He's self-oriented. He doesn't even think that 2 generations from now, his family will not have land to sustain itself. He's just thinking of himself. And that's terribly important because they bring that attitude right when they come here. Okay? The self-attitude. Now, it applies to, of course, things like nature, but it applies in other ways too. So if we talk about nature and sustainability, I'll mention that I once lived in a house in a city called Coquitlam, and I was there for a short time, but the house was still in the state of 40 years ago, of when it was still a white society. This was a large lot of land, and it had a big front yard, a garden, and a backyard. And the house occupied perhaps 40% of the land, okay? 40% of the land, and then there's the front yard and a backyard with a vegetable garden. And it was really a very nice backyard because there were tall trees, very tall trees casting a shade.
We'll pick this up on the other side, Frank. We got 1/2 hour segment left, everyone. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Frank, before the break, you were talking about a nice home you were visiting with a nice backyard.
No, I was staying there, actually. I stayed there for 4 months. I stayed there for a while. I lived there and as a tenant. And the backyard was a very grassy backyard, and it had elm trees. It had a cedar tree. It had a row of trees, in fact. It even had a fig tree, and I used to eat the figs off it. But it was a joy to see in the shade of the trees, this grass, the apples rolling in it from the apple trees, the apples that had fallen. A kind of peaceable, rustic scene. And there was a children's swing, and I used to look at that swing and say, at one time there was a family here, and these little boys and girls used to be on this swing above this sweet grass in the shade of all these trees and picking up apples. And there was even a dense bunch of bushes that nobody had disturbed, and there were a fairly big family of raccoons there. And they'd come out at night every so often, the raccoons, and you'd see them coming out in a row, the biggest in front, then the second biggest, then the third, and finally at the tail end, the little baby hurrying to keep up. The raccoons wouldn't come out in the daytime generally, but they had a shelter there, refuge. And then this house got bought by, in fact, one of my clients. I used to tutor his daughter and his son, rather. And this was an East Indian man, very successful. And he basically chopped down almost every tree there, and he built a monster house that went right up to the walls. There was only a 4-foot gap between the walls of the house and the walls. So whereas the house had occupied 40% of the land, now it occupied 95% of the land. Just about 95%, I thought. And the reason was he wanted a big house to impress everybody. A bigger house means you're a bigger man. And the house was like a concrete tomb. All the pleasant, large bay windows were gone. It was now like a fortress. And he had all these basements in it so that he could make money off tenants. That's one of the reasons the house was large. So that 3 basement tenants, 3 different basements, it'll pay the rent. It'll pay the mortgage for him. And one day he'll own it out free. So whatever little space was left, he had that concreted over. So all that nature, the trees, the grass, the apples rolling on the grass, the children playing on their swings, the fig trees, the vegetables, the front garden, all gone. So this self-oriented attitude kind of destroy the universe around you, and that includes the living universe. And we have today in Vancouver whole city blocks where the houses are built right up to the walls with just a narrow passage between the house and the walls. And everything concrete, and the once green block is gone, and there are no birds. Well, no, don't have any trees to shelter in anymore. So the attitudes that these people had in India, they bring their attitudes to the Western world, and they change it into what has slowly become a replica of India or wherever they come from.
Could you comment more on the power dynamics within some of the relationships in India, particularly the family? You write about this quite a bit in the book, and it seems that in India everyone is both a master and a slave. So a man could be a master to his children, who he treats as his slaves or indentured servants, and he brings out the wrath upon them that he gets from his boss above him.
Okay, let me tell you a specific incident, okay?
Okay.
There was this house when I was a teenager. There was this house that these people that I knew a little bit, and the reason that I had to visit them at all was I'd borrow a book from them or return a book to them. And in this house there was a father and several sons. There was a couple of girls, several sons. The eldest son was about, say, 26, 27, and the chap I was visiting was about 14. The one thing you noticed when you went into their house was that the children would sneak around. Like, they wouldn't put down something, they'd put it down gently so there'd be no sound. If a table leg scraped, they'd be terrified. Don't do it. I said, why? Because they'd sneak around because they were told, don't make a noise. If there was a noise, the father would say, who is that? What's going on? And to draw attention to the father was a terrible thing, because first of all, he'll be annoyed. Second thing, as soon as he notices there's a son around, he'll have them do some menial service, like massaging his head or something to instill the slave idea into them. Now, I go that into quite a bit in chapter 5 of my book, but it's from seeing things like this, the father's instant wrath, that didn't I tell you to tremble like slaves and be totally silent? So if he hears a noise, he says, what's that? What's going on? And these kids are sneaking around like so many thieves in the night. They don't dare talk loudly. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that's happening in every house in India, but it's part of the culture. It's part of the trend. Many houses are like that. So one day, when the father was out, they had a little bit of a yard, and they said, let's play badminton. You know what badminton is, right?
Yes, kind of like tennis meets volleyball.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of a light shuttlecock. Mm-hmm. What they call a shuttlecock, a very light thing. It flies and you hit it over the net. So after the second game, this fellow was saying, unfortunately, this has to stop as of next week. We won't be able to do it as of next week. And I said, why not? The weather's still good. He said, no, my elder brother's coming back from Japan. And I said, well, what of it? Well, the elder brother, as it happens, was working illegally in Japan. There he sneaks around doing an illegal job and staying out of the view of the immigration police. And the Japanese at that time had a lot of third world people going to Japan because the Japanese yen was so strong. It was a very strong currency. So third world people would work there illegally, doing the dirty and dangerous jobs and sneaking around and living in the worst of conditions, avoiding the police. And his brother was one of them. But when he came home, he was an exalted figure. Because in the hierarchy, he has to kowtow to his father and put up with every kind of humiliation. But he's now, when he comes home, he tells his brothers, I don't like this. You playing badminton and having fun and cavorting like wild goats and not being serious. I don't like this kind of thing. You stop it. So in the hierarchy, the father was stopped, and then the next eldest son can dominate the younger ones, and he can even tell them to stop playing badminton.
Yeah. That mindset, if I can't be happy, then no one can be happy. I hate that.
To see happiness when someone is happy, you resent it. If you're there's the saying in George Orwell's 1984, how does one man assert his power of another? By inflicting pain upon him. That's how. Mm-hmm. One man asserts his power of another by making him feel the pain and compelling him to feel it. But really it's part of something bigger. They can't stand someone being happy, because if he's happy, he's not kowtowing to them. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, very much inside an Indian family, the urge is, if you see someone happy, you've got to stop it, if you have the power to do it. Now, the father is a minor clerk. In this case, he was a minor clerk. He went to the office and did a boring job and took a lot of shit from his superiors and, had to say yes sir, no sir. And then he'd come home and he'd take it out on his kids by saying, he'd lie there and say, massage my feet. And then he felt the master. Then the head clerk he had taken orders from the head clerk, but now he's able to be as powerful as his head clerk. He's able to pass on. There's someone below him that he can make unhappy, to dominate, to command. This hierarchical sense is terribly strong in India, and I believe it comes from Africa. I do believe it comes from there.
Now, what can you tell us about the caste system and the role that has played in the Indian power dynamics, and also what component race plays within that caste system as well?
Well, there's the thing that suppose you never had a caste system. Okay, let me take the history of it. India, you people living in America seem to think that you're the first Caucasian African society in the world. You're not. India is the first Caucasian African society. And I mean that literally. In the dawn of history, in the very early stages of human travel or emigration, various waves of Africans came out of Africa, crossed the Horn of Africa, as they call it, through the region of Ethiopia and the Gulf of Aden. And they passed on east through Iran. And they came to India, where they found nice African-type landscape, nice and marshy and muddy and tropical, very fertile. And they settled there. And some of them moved on in different waves. Different waves came in, and the later waves seemed to dominate the earlier ones. There was a racial war between the first wave, and the second wave dominated the first wave, the first settlers, and the third wave of settlers dominated the earlier ones. But some of them actually passed on from India to Malaysia, where there's still pockets of them. They went to New Guinea, where you see their descendants, the black people there. And they went on to Australia, where you will see black people there. But all of them have had some minor modifications. The Africans who came to India, they lost their frizzy hair. The Africans who went to Australia developed different features. And some of them actually spread out over the Pacific Ocean. In the Pacific Ocean, there was always tremendous fights between the Africans, the black Melanesians, and the Mongoloids, the more golden-skinned islanders of the Pacific, like the Hawaiians and the Samoans. And you may not know it, but some of these Africans actually went across the sea to South America, and they settled South America. In fact, they're the first, as far as people know, they're the first inhabitants of South America. And guess what? These native Indians are so peaceful. They came down to South America. They traveled from north to south, and they genocided the blacks in South America. They literally chopped their heads off. There are cave painting-like drawings of an African sitting on the ground or forced to kneel while a native Indian swung a sickle-like object to chop his head off.
They have similar artistic renderings of white men being killed by the loving Indians as well. The loving American Indians. Now, were you talking about the Olmecs or the Toltecs there?
Well, I'm talking about the Mongoloids who moved, your people down there, the Iroquois and the Sioux and the Pawnee. They stopped there, but others moved south. Other Mongoloids moved further south. And they are the Amerindians of today, the mestizos.
And they literally genocided these blacks in South America.
I meant the blacks themselves. I think the Olmecs are at least pretty African in their looks.
Oh yeah, so there are remnants of the Africans there. There are remnants of them, but very small remnants. But what I was saying is that this long trek from Africa through Persia through India to New Guinea and then Australia. In the course of it, the ones who stopped in India, they stopped and they multiplied. And then one fine day, they had an enemy they couldn't deal with. A Caucasian tribe came from the region of the Ukraine. And this Caucasian tribe, they called themselves Arjo, Aryan.
Is that where you get Arjuna as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So a lot of Indians still have the names ending in Arjo, like Bhattacharjo. So Bhatta of the Aryans. So anyway, these Caucasians, they were a fair people, and many of them were blue-eyed, green-eyed, blue-eyed, as a matter of fact. They, around 1500 BC, they entered the Indian subcontinent, and in short order, they conquered the whole continent. But they wanted to keep themselves separate from these darks, whom they called ugly black darks. They prayed to their god, their war god Indra, the equivalent of Mars, to give them the good fortune and the weapons and the courage to subdue the darks and kill them and reduce them to slavery. And which they did. They conquered the darks, the Africans. And they said, well, we've got to keep ourselves separate from these people, and that's where the caste system started. They said, don't you dare intermarry with us. In fact, even if a black touches one of the Aryans, that Aryan gets polluted.
So this is where the untouchables originated.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they then said, okay, the way that we can perpetuate this is to write it into our religion. Because people believe religion. You tell them that don't try to rape my fair daughter. They won't quite obey you. One fine day they will seduce your fair daughter. Some black will come and seduce your fair daughter. So no, let's write it into religion. And then people will listen. So the religion they had, they incorporated something into it. And they said that just as the people of Iceland, the Nordics have this primal being called Ymir, Y-M-I-R.
Right.
So they have the primal being called Ymir. Ymir was a giant who was formed out of the fog and the mist and from the milk of this primal cow. Well, Ymir eventually got cut up and his bones went to make the mountains. His blood went to make the sea.
His skull is the canopy of the earth, I believe.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So anyway, his legs are this and his flesh is that. And his flesh is the earth, is the soil of the earth. Well, the Aryans had a similar primal being in their religion. They called him Purusha. And they said that from the head of Purusha sprang the Brahmin, the intellectual class and the priestly class. From his arms sprang the warrior class. But where you go further down, from his thighs were born the Shudra, the Vaishyas, the merchant class, the traders. And from his feet, the lowest part, the most despised part of him, the feet that get dirty all the time, from the feet sprang the lowest caste of all, the Shudra. And it is the divine order that they should never intermarry and they should stay in their professions and one is superior to the other. And that a whole set of rules, for example, if a person of this caste came within 60 feet of a person of that caste, oh my God, that fellow's polluted. And he has to undergo so many purification rites in order to become a Brahmin once again or a warrior once again.
But it didn't really last. Mixing did occur, right? If we look, into the future from that time, it seems that this system that was set up into place is not an effective deterrent to multiculturalism taking its effect.
Absolutely no effect. When two peoples live in the same town, in the same street, in the same village, there will be race mixing. No, even, you see, in the religion, they actually made it a crime punishable by the most terrible torments to have any interracial breeding or mixing, any interracial sex. And they tried to keep the lower castes happy. Here's a lower caste man who's born into a race of toilet cleaners. All day he scoops up the excrement. And that's what he does, and then his son has to do it, and his son. But they're going to revolt one day, so how did they keep them happy? They said that, this won't last forever. If you keep your mouth shut and your head down, and you scoop up that shit obediently and salute your superiors and betters and pay your dues to the Brahmin, guess what? When you die, you might be reborn as a Brahmin. That's your incentive for being a good slave. You'll be reborn in the highest form as a Brahmin or perhaps as a warrior. And that also came into the religion as a way of keeping them dumb and quiet and looking forward to that afterlife. Mm-hmm. So, did it work in segregation? No, the segregation never worked. There's always been mixing, and in India you will find every possible shade of color, from the fine-featured, fair, Persian-type person right down to the absolutely negroid black person.
And what role does it play in the hierarchy today?
Well, in the way of money, it never stopped anybody. A fair-skinned, high-class Brahmin, if he went bankrupt, he went broke. And a lower caste person who had money could usually buy comfort and could be regarded as superior to the Brahmin in many instances, having more money and tougher. There has been an effect. People have been confined in professions. Like a certain guy is born into a caste, he was forced to be a leather worker and he had to continue being a leather worker. He wasn't allowed to do certain things. And certainly the higher caste, they got the better jobs always, and the government jobs. A higher caste often meant higher class. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely mobility. A high caste person can get into financial trouble. A low caste person can be rich. There has been that. But what you do see today in India, there is mobility. When a dark-skinned person, and dark-skinned just doesn't mean dark-skinned, it means blunt-featured, it means kind of squat-bodied, kind of pot-bellied. It means a whole range of things. This man, suppose he gets rich. The first thing he'll do is look for Aryan wives for his sons. It's called literally rising in race. Mm-hmm. Literally, the words are rising in race. They want to improve their race and they want to have better looking grandchildren. So the first thing he does, if he have money, he'll say, I want a slim, tall, fine-featured, fair-skinned bride. And that's the way he advertises it.
And what has happened with us, we've had our women conditioned to look for tall, dark, and handsome. The dark being the key word there. Now, before we run out of time, I wanted to just ask you really quickly about the religion itself. Have you found any value in it or authenticity that might be of worth for people from the Indo-European, because that really what it is, the Indo-European culture. You look at the languages, Sanskrit to Latin and to Greek. There's so many words that just correlate, and there's such a connection there. It seems that this is a representation of a European religion, a very coherent one that was there long before Christianity. So, go ahead.
It didn't come from India to the West in that sense. That's not quite how it is.
Oh, that's not what that was implying. I meant, I was saying if we're trying to get back to a core, this is one that we could look at as one that was a representation of what was there before Christianity.
Well, these Aryans, they were in the center. They were in the Ukraine, between Europe and Asia. Some of them went west. Some of them went east. As a result, some of their words are common to both. They contributed their words to the West, they contributed their words to the East.
Right.
So you say the word path, P-A-T-H, right?
Yes.
Path. In India, we say poth.
Ah.
You say name, we say nam. Okay. You say mother, we say mata. Now, the reason is that the same people contributed their words to both. So some of the words in the West are very similar to some in the East. Again, the same people contributed, they came from a family that had a pantheon of gods. You know, the Greek gods, the Roman pantheon, the Celtic pantheon. These are all common to the Aryans. Well, the Aryans who went to India took their pantheon with them. So they have a pantheon of gods, some of which are heroics, you know, some. And then they got slowly affected by the natives. The gods turned into elephants or had 7 arms, you know, 8 arms or something.
Right.
But it started with a very Caucasian pantheon that became Indianized or Africanized gradually. If you look at present day India, it's a mass of religions. There's the Hindu religion, then came the Muslim religion, which people embraced because it let them escape from the caste system. It preached that all people are equal. So they said, hey, that's better for us. There are Christians there. And in the Hindu religion, there's a mass of variants. So I don't think that any Westerner would get anything out of it.
Well, what I was actually getting at was more of the texts themselves, rather than the present day manifestations of an Indian spirituality. And I really do think that it is pretty ridiculous that this whole wave of the hippies and the Beatles bringing the wisdom of the East over to us, and the Hare Krishnas and all the rest. I think that was one big psychological operation, and inherently anti-white as well. People don't need to go travel over to India to find who they are. In fact, they'll feel quite out of place. I would imagine. Frank, we are just almost out of time here, so I did want to let you get in one more promotion of your book, and let us know anything else you'd like to wrap up with, anything you might have coming up or whatnot.
Well, the very point you made about the fact that people in the West are fascinated by things Eastern. They have this impression that's encapsulated in yoga. Yoga preaches that you must be in harmony with all living things and in peace with all living things. That's a wonderful Eastern attitude, and so they want the yoga and Buddhism and all that. Well, guess what? Go to India, and you'll get strife and conflict. Not yoga. Not yoga.
Frank, it was great talking to you. I really thank you so much for coming on. I encourage people to go check out your book, Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells.
Wonderful. Great talking to you, pal.
You as well. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I'll be back again next week. Stay tuned to Renegade Broadcasting.